There is a fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call
Welcome back, everyone, to yet another episode of Movie Club. And tonight we're continuing our slow binge through the first season of Stranger Things. I adore this show, and we've already watched the first 2 chapters of this show. So, for the first time ever on this show, let's do this segment called Previously on Movie Club. So let's quickly run through the 2 chapters we've already seen. After a late-night D&D session, the boys split off and head for their respective homes, with Will Byers taking a shortcut back to his house, down Mirkwood. This shortcut puts him in the crosshairs of an escaped creature that the rest of the boys later termed the Demogorgon. After trying to hide at his house, Will is captured by the Demogorgon and is transported somewhere else. The next day, when Will's friends get the news from Chief Hopper that Will is indeed missing, they decide to disobey the curfew and head out to mount their own search party for their own lost party member. Later that dark and stormy night, the boys head out into the woods and instead of finding Will, locate 11, a girl who has just recently escaped from Hawkins' lab. After taking 11 in, Mike and the crew try and understand her story and where she's coming from. Lucas is, understandably, wary to trust the stranger, while Mike decides to give the young girl a safe place to sleep for the night until they can find out more about her. As they talk things over, they discover that their strange new friend might also have some latent mind powers. It turns out that a mysterious older man in black from Hawkins' lab is also looking for a lost girl. While Chief Hopper and the local populace mount their official search party for the lost boy, Jonathan is out searching the woods on his own, utilizing his camera to take pictures of evidence that might help him and the police find Will. While out in the woods, he stumbles upon a house party hosted by King Steve. While Jonathan is out peeking in on a party, his mother Joyce is getting weird calls from wherever Will is, and in turn, frying her phone. But back at the party, things are starting to heat up as the underage teens engage in some very big horror rule breaking. In attendance is Nancy, Mike's older sister, Barb, Nancy's friend, and Steve's less savory friends in Tommy and Carol. As the couples pair off, Jonathan stays behind to take some pictures of the lone Barb, who has decided to lounge at the pool to wait for Nancy. Jonathan gets distracted by Nancy undressing in the window and takes some pictures of that as well.
What is wrong with you, you creep? Put the camera down, you weirdo.
While Jonathan is distracted, Barb bleeds into the pool and is taken by the Demogorgon, vanishing entirely before Jonathan can bring his attention back to her.
And I guess that just about brings us up to speed.
So those are the first 2 chapters. Chapter 1 being The Vanishing of Will Byers, and Chapter 2 being The Weirdo on Maple Street. Tonight we've got 2 more incredible chapters in the first season of Stranger Things. And that is Chapter 3, Holly Jolly, and Chapter 4, The Body. Chapter 3, also known as Holly Jolly, has one of my favorite cliffhangers in the entire show. And the cliffhanger at the end of Chapter 3 is so beautifully constructed and so emotionally beautiful that if you haven't seen the show, it's one of the best parts of it. Plus the needle drop of the cover of David Bowie's Heroes, perfection. Everything from the build-up of the very Stand By Me sequences throughout this entire episode, as well as the huge emotional moment at the climax of the episode. This beautiful chapter in Stranger Things has some of the best music and one of the most powerful moments in the entire show. Now, in the later episodes, obviously, we're going to get the climax emotionally, but here is some of the early stuff that proves to you this show really knows and cares about its characters, and its story is entirely character-driven. Now, Chapter 4, without doing any spoilers, is also called The Body, which is the same name of a short story by Stephen King, which was later adapted into the Rob Reiner-directed Stand By Me, starring Will Wheaton and Corey Feldman. And that's such a fantastic movie, and so many moments throughout this pair of episodes are directly kind of bouncing off that story. There's so many moments and little touches that clearly echo that brilliant short story and that brilliant film from the 80s. Now, you started to see the Demogorgon in the past 2 episodes, but this is when we're going to start seeing him a lot more. Especially in this first season, Stranger Things really tried to keep things as practical as humanly possible. And in fact, there is an actor in a legit latex special effects suit that is running around in costume as the Demogorgon. Now, in later seasons, some of the creatures are just impossible, really, to do without CGI. And there is some CGI touch-ups on the Demogorgon itself, but pretty much all the effects you see of the Demogorgon in the show are legit. They're practical. There's a dude in a suit that the actors can really bounce off of. Now, in my last video, I talked about how this series overall is going to be a pastiche of 80s films and the inspirations that the Duffer Brothers grew up loving. I'm going to talk quickly about some of the ones that we've already seen and some of the ones that we can expect to see in the coming season. Already, we've pulled from a movie club screening from just last month from A Nightmare on Elm Street. The Demogorgon's physical kind of manifestation first on the screen, other than in shadows in that first episode and kind of a brief, like, second-long glimpse. In Chapter 2, we really finally get to see our first full-on glimpse of the Demogorgon. The way that he's introduced into the scene is very reminiscent of one of the most iconic shots from A Nightmare on Elm Street, with the Demogorgon literally coming through the wall to try and get Joyce. Of course, you should also be watching the posters on the wall. In Will's room, there's a Jaws poster. Screened that pretty early on. As well as in Jonathan's room, there's a poster for one of my favorite campy horror films from the 80s, and that is The Evil Dead. And the Jaws references don't just stop with the posters in Will's room. Also goes back to a moment in Chapter 1 when Joyce goes to report Will being a missing child. That close-up shot of the typewriter, literally pulled from Jaws. It's an incredible moment that if you've seen those movies, it's easy for you to notice those little moments. And if you grew up with watching those movies, either as effectively someone who wished they were an 80s kid seeing these movies legit in theaters, or someone who actually did see all these movies in theaters, these are iconic moments that when we sit down and watch the show, we're like, it's fun. It's nice to see things that we've loved be inspirations on things that we love now. And those references are just the tip of the iceberg. We've got quite a few coming up tonight and in the coming 2 weeks. If you can, make it a little bit of a game. Try and find some. Or, if you really can and you're really trying to go for broke, try and write down all of them. You're probably not going to get them because even now, this watch through, I am noticing new things. And I'd be delighted to see which things that you recognize from both the movies that we screened this year, as well as things that you've noticed from other movies that you love. That's one of the great things about Stranger Things being such a pastiche of 80s film and just this kind of culture, is that it really resonates with so many people who are either nostalgic for that era because they grew up reading those books as they were being printed or seeing those movies in the theater as they were being released. But it's also great for kids like me who grew up watching these movies on television and falling in love with this genre at a young age and growing up to truly appreciate it now as the thing it is now. It's amazing to see that we can take the influences of these great movies and these great books and these great stories and put them into something new and modern that feels both like a throwback, but is also a very modern show that is appealing to people around the world. Well, that's about all we have for this week. And I thank you for joining me on this journey. And I hope that you really enjoy these next 2 episodes because they're some of the best in the season. Now, we've got some really great stuff coming up, both in these episodes and in the coming weeks, because let's be honest, there's not really a bad episode in this batch. This season is practically perfect in every way. So that's all, folks, for this week, and I hope to see you back here next week for our next club meeting, as we dive deep into the next 2 episodes of Stranger Things. But without further ado, let's dig into chapters 3 and 4 of Stranger Things, Holly Jolly and the Body. Do you copy?